Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. I'm Mary SanGiovanni, and I'm up to shenanigans once again of the usual cosmic proportions. If you're hearing creaky doors, that would be Brian Keane in the background trying to provide some ambiance for our topic today. Thank you. That's sexy. Today we're going to be talking about The Damned Thing by Ambrose Bierce. Now, a little bit about the author, because I've been thinking a lot about how to break these stories down and analyze them, and one of the things I'd like to get into a little bit more, not too much more, because we could do entire episodes just on the authors themselves, but I do think it's important to tap a little bit into who the authors were as people, because if you're going to fully analyze a story and really look at the deeper layers of something, then it's kind of important to know about the person who wrote the story, because any writer will tell you that a lot of ourselves go into what we're writing. And Ambrose Bierce was pretty much a fascinating man. He was a soldier. From the research I could tell, he was in the Civil War, but I believe he was a soldier in general. I think he was in more than one war. He was definitely a man of wit and of satire. And ultimately, he was a man of mystery. He really kind of an interesting guy. He was known primarily for being part of the realism movement in literature, and he was known for his journalism. But Bierce also wrote, in addition to that, he wrote satire, he wrote horror fiction, war fiction, fantasy, science fiction, westerns, memoirs, humor, literary criticism, and poetry. Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is a classic of American literature. I remember reading it in college. And so is The Devil's Dictionary, which is a sort of humorous look at the definitions of words in the English language. He did have a very tough life. He lost both of his sons to tragic circumstances. Really, really sad stuff. And he left his wife after he found a letter where it appeared that she was being unfaithful. So he left her for infidelity. And then he lost a daughter a year after that. So pretty much all the people he cared about, which seems to be, unfortunately, a sort of running trend with a lot of writers of horror. But I guess, that's where you tap into it. He kind of lost many people, the people who were closest to him. He himself suffered complications from war wounds, and we know that that plays a part. If you're suffering from any kind of mental or physical illness, it does definitely play a part in how you view the world and how you write about it. What Bierce did, so far as I can tell, is he chose to look at the world with sort of a humorous, sarcastic kind of viewpoint. Now, it's believed that in 1913, Bierce, who was then 71, went to Mexico to join Pancho Villa's army as an observer. He subsequently disappeared somewhere near the city of Chihuahua in January 1914. That's after doing an investigation as to his whereabouts. The last place they can put him was in Mexico near Chihuahua in January 1914. The last letter he wrote was December 26th, 1913, and in it he stated, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination," which is some crazy writer foreshadowing about his own life that he disappeared. He's listed, if you look at celebrities who have vanished and whose cases have never been solved, missing people cases, Ambrose Bierce is on that list as notable celebrities who have completely vanished. Now, The Damned Thing, the story we want to tackle today, that was first published in Tales from New York Town Topics on December 7th, 1893. So this is one of those stories that was not published first in Weird Tales. It was Tales from New York Town Topics, December 7th, 1893. Now, based on that timeline, this story would technically fall into pre-cosmic horror. I would put it in science fantasy, although actually I believe that scholars consider it a science fiction story. And yet still, I think this story is a prime example of cosmic horror that can exist without many of the traditional tropes of cosmic horror. For example, there are no cults in this story. There are no slavering or otherwise. There are no groups of people hell-bent on, raising ancient gods and monsters. There are no ancient tomes from which to do that. There's no Necronomicon. There's no, Cult de Ghoul or Unausspecilichen Kulten. Again, me massacring German. I apologize to the Germans. There's no overt sense of helplessness or hopelessness in the face of a greater evil, at least not on the surface. So we're going to come back to that. So I even though it is missing these classic tropes of cosmic horror, I still think a case can be made for this story as fitting into that subgenre. There's some thin science here, and I say thin because it's not that the science isn't sound. It's more that I'm not sure that it can be applied quite the way that Bierce did this in terms of modern science. But it's science, nevertheless, which evidently inspired Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space, because the story involves the death of a man at the hands of an invisible monster. Now, this has been done in this story, or this concept, has been adapted many times since then. In fact, one of the Masters of Horror episodes was based on the damn thing, actually. It was sort of a modern retelling of it. The idea of an invisible monster is an interesting concept because it speaks to our fear of the unknown, which is definitely a cosmic horror. I mean, Lovecraft said the strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the greatest fear is fear of the unknown. And what better personified, I don't know if you could say monsterified, a concept than an invisible monster. Now, the dead man in the story, and that's not really a spoiler, he's dead right from the beginning, is Hugh Morgan. And he theorizes that this invisible monster is a color outside of the spectrum of human vision. Now, that science, like I said, that science is sound. We know such colors exist. We can't see ultraviolet and we can't see infrared. And there is a theory among paranormal investigators and the paranormal sciences that a lot of that which we consider paranormal, ghosts, demons, creatures like that, elemental type creatures, they vibrate or exist in the ultraviolet or infrared spectrum, depending on the type of creature you're talking about. And so a lot of times when people investigate these things in real life, when they investigate, they bring a camera that has had the ultraviolet or infrared filter taken off, so that they can also take pictures in these spectrums and thereby maybe catch something that exists in a vibrational level that we're not aware of. Now, I believe that a lot of this has been post-1893, so I think Hugh Morgan was just sort of, maybe tapping into this creative zeitgeist that happens from time to time to turn out to be real decades later. But Hugh Morgan, did I say he? In the story, he believes this entire creature is of this color that we simply can't see. Okay, but it's this bit of science, however, flimsy or whatever, that lays the groundwork for the element of cosmic horror in the story. This is where I think the real connecting piece to this story being cosmic horror comes from. The idea behind this invisible monster is that there's a world out there that we may not be able to see, populated with things that are able to hurt or even kill us. I believe that given the science and technology advancements and the medical advancements nowadays, that is one of the reasons why paranormal stories like Paranormal Activity or Sinister or The Conjuring, why they are so popular, particularly with younger generations of horror fans. It's because there still exists that possibility that there are things that we just can't see, that science, that normal science, or that the biology of our eyes or of our senses in general limits us in being able to see. Now, the fact that in this story, the things that are populating our world, the invisible monsters, are able to hurt or even kill us, is part of the horror, but it's a bigger picture than that. Okay. Now, to Hugh Morgan, he's a fairly simple guy. Okay, and I don't mean simple as in being not smart. I mean simple as in he's living a fairly simple lifestyle. I don't get the impression he's terribly educated, but he's not an unintelligent man. He may be somewhat inexperienced. So whether these things come from outer space or another dimension, or have always been a natural and perhaps well camouflaged part of this world's flora and fauna, like some of the other cosmic horrors, like Arthur Machen, some of his stories, it's almost irrelevant to somebody like Hugh Morgan. Okay? The problem is that the damn thing is there. It's a problem to him and his dogs, and it needs to be dealt with. That its presence implies a vast unseen world of dangerous things, that's the true horror of the story. But it's perhaps recognized only by the coroner, a man more worldly than many of his peers. And like many Lovecraftian protagonists, he chooses to bury what he's discovered, that piece of information, for the sake of mankind. Although in the story, in Bierce's description, it was because it might confuse the jury at the inquest to this man's death. The jury itself, many mountain men, I believe they were called forest men, wild men, these mountain man peers, they are either unable or unwilling to accept exotic forces in the world at work. So they are perfectly comfortable chalking up Hugh Morgan's death to a tragic result of nothing more unusual than a rogue mountain lion, despite the fact that the witness statement from Morgan's writer friend, William Harker, seems to suggest otherwise. Now, another somewhat common format for cosmic horror stories is this epistolary format, in which we have letters or diary entries, things like that. And Bierce does this in kind of a neat way. He has William Harker come to the inquest because he was present when Hugh Morgan was killed. And he is asked to recount the events of that day, or the events of the day leading up to it. And he said that Morgan seemed very distracted. He seemed very upset. And what he provides in writing is a version of this account. Now, in the story, the coroner says, well, you say that this is a very extraordinary, hard to believe account. And Harker says, that shouldn't matter to you as long as I'm swearing to you that it's true. And he does. He swears that it's true. He says that he's going to publish it later as fiction because he doesn't believe anyone else will believe it. But he wants people who are investigating Morgan's death to understand that he's not BSing this. This is an account of what happened. And essentially, the coroner has William Harker read this account of the events that happened, where during a hunting trip, Hugh Morgan appears to be torn apart by, he's lifted up off the ground by some invisible force and torn up. Now, the other piece of epistolary information that we get toward the end, and that's actually Morgan's account from his own diary. Okay, it will never see the light of day because the coroner is going to make sure of that. But we get to see it because I suppose the story is, despite the different flashback accounts, written accounts, the story is kind of from the coroner's point of view. And because the coroner knows it, then the reader will know it. And what Morgan accounts in his diary entries is a growing fear of invisible things that are essentially invading his safe space. They're invading his farm, they're upsetting his dogs, they're it's something that is becoming a problem. It is something that he only describes as being seen because when it crosses the hilltop near his house, it blocks out the stars, which I think is a beautiful description of something without describing what it looks like at all. But it has not only a sense of what this thing doesn't look like, I guess, but also what it means. It is something that is sort of swallowing up what we know, what we find safe. And it's done in a very subtle sort of way. There's no heavy-handed, this awful horror which could not be described. It doesn't need to be described because it can't be seen, but it's enough that it blocks out the stars. We have humor, okay, which is something I kind of wanted to touch on here. There's humor which is more overt in Bierce's work than, in my opinion, anything in Lovecraft's. Now, humor to me is the other side of the coin in horror. And sometimes the right amount of humor with the right amount of horror can set a good balance for a horror story. We can find something all the more horrific, or sometimes maybe all the more bearable, based on the little bit of humor in the story. We get a sense of true humanity, because a lot of people, when they're scared or upset, they crack jokes. I don't think that it is easy to deliberately write humor into something. So anybody who does it, somebody like, say, Jeff Strand, I think that's an amazing skill. I can't do it. Anything that's funny in any of my books is unintentionally funny. To me, that's just the way people are. People crack jokes when they're scared or when they're upset. But there is something that I think, to me, it's like salt. It enhances the flavor of horror if it's done right. Now, there is a little bit of humor in this story. The interactions between the coroner and William Harker are kind of amusing, which is sort of Bierce's way of looking at the world. You know, as I mentioned before, we tend to put a lot of ourselves into something. And I think that Bierce had kind of a sarcastic and satirical wit, and it makes its way into the conversation between this coroner and Harker, particularly when they're discussing his career as a writer. Now, a lot of scholars say that Lovecraft didn't take, he didn't take himself that seriously. He didn't take it, that there was a lightness to an extent in some of his fiction. Now, I don't think it reads that way. Having read some of Lovecraft's letters, I can see that he didn't always take himself that seriously, and he didn't take the business of publishing. He could have sort of a light-minded view of that. But his fiction doesn't read as if there's a whole lot of humor in it. That's not to say there's no humor in it, but it's not like Edgar Allan Poe, who almost wrote with, he almost wrote the way he talked, the way I imagine he talked, with a kind of sense of humor in his outlook about things. But Bierce did. Bierce wrote about, the way he looked at things, I think plays a lot into how he unfolds a narrative, kind of like M.R. James. If you've ever read any of M.R. James's stories, which we probably won't be covering too much because they're pretty much straight up ghost stories and not cosmic horror stories. But M.R. James, like, his sense of humor is all through his stories. Bierce's work, to me, is like that. So it's something a little bit outside of, again, this traditional cosmic horror frame, the format. But I think it works, because I think that so much of Lovecraft, we talked about how there's no overt sense of hopelessness or helplessness. Sometimes humor can illustrate that, to underline it in a way, underline a sense of hopelessness or helplessness without beating you over the head with some dark, depressing club. That there is a sense of that in The Damned Thing. There is a sense of inevitability, because the story starts off with him already dead. The main character, one of the main characters, already dead. I think that humor sometimes just goes to underline that, but in an almost sarcastic way. It's like, yep, the world sucks, and we're all in it. Nobody gets out of life alive. But one of the things that I think is more reflective of modern cosmic horror in this particular story is that there's a certain bravery human beings. Now, in a lot of Lovecraft stories, the characters are particularly well educated, maybe more so than the average, person even today. They are all very much readers, to the point where there's not a whole lot of physical activity. Some of them, sometimes their physical health isn't that good specifically because they have chosen to be sort of bookworms, and they have read extensively, so they're scholars in their particular field. It's not the case in The Damn Thing. Hugh Morgan is pretty much your average, I guess, middle American kind of farmer guy, which is not to say that those people, the people of his profession are not well educated. But I believe at the time, he would not have been, let's say, a university man. He would not have been somebody who was necessarily particularly well read. He's living a fairly simple, rustic life. And while his journal entries show that he is an intelligent man, he is evidently somebody capable of looking at a greater picture of science and biology. That aspect in and of itself is not what he's chasing after. He's not looking for knowledge. He's not looking for answers. What he's looking for is security. He's looking for safety. He's facing a greater force threatening his way of life, and he just wants to protect himself and his farm and his dogs and his stuff. And that's really what it comes down to. The fact that he invites Harker out to visit him, Harker thinks it's because he's depressed. He thinks it's because he needs, he needs somebody around to sort of, pick his spirits up. But the fact of the matter is that Hugh Morgan wants him there because he wants to see if he's not crazy, which I think is very, sort of forward thinking, that he wants confirmation, like any scientist would, that what's happening is really happening. And because of that, I think it creates, again, it is pre-cosmic horror. It's pre-Lovecraft, I guess, but it's still cosmic horror, and it seems to speak more to modern cosmic horror, where instead of giving up in the face of these greater forces, Morgan's going to fight this thing to the death if need be. He's going to take back his little section of the world. He's going to reestablish his dominance over his little patch of life and safety and security, and he's going to reestablish his significance in the world, despite the fact that he's now discovered that it is full of things that he never expected. So that's why I feel that The Damn Thing is a significant contribution to the cosmic horror canon. It's a great story. If you haven't read it, I don't think I've given away too many spoilers, but it's definitely worth checking out, as is a lot of Bierce's non-horror things. And that's pretty much it. I think next week we're going to tackle a writer who is not as familiar to me, A. Merritt, and some of his stories, and see where we go from there. So that's it for this week. I want to thank Dave again, because he's awesome, and he's engineering everything for me. If you appreciate what Dave does on Cosmic Shenanigans or any other place, check out his Twitch channel. It is twitch.tv/Meteor Notes. He plays video games. He talks horror. He talks cats. He talks all kinds of fun things. You can also give the Horror Show with Brian Keene a listen. I'm on that. Dave is on that, and of course Brian Keene is on that. And we talk about anything and everything related to horror. Sometimes funny, sometimes serious, sometimes sad, sometimes maddening, but always an interesting listen. And that is available, just like Cosmic Shenanigans past, present, and future episodes, because time in the cosmic horror world is not a linear thing. You can check all of these things out, as well as Brian Keene's side project with Chris Golden, another dear friend of ours, which is Defenders Dialogue. You can find all of these for free, always, on Project Entertainment Network, Stitcher, Spotify, I don't think I'm on Spotify yet. I think I may have to accumulate a certain number of shows maybe to get onto Spotify. But keep checking Spotify if that's your vehicle of choice. Google Play, iTunes, and pretty much all other platforms that play podcasts, we are there. If you'd like to advertise on Cosmic Shenanigans, please do. You can send an email to Armand Rosamilia at armandrosamilia@gmail.com, and we can talk about your newest Cosmic Shenanigans novel that you're writing, or short story collection, or anything else. And again, if you have any ideas about things you'd like me to tackle, any kind of music, video games, movies, television, books, anything Cosmic Shenanigans related, anything Cosmic Horror related, hit me up at the Facebook or on Twitter and let me know, and we'll talk about it. Okay? Thank you for listening. See you next week. Bye.
May I have your attention for the morning announcements? Please be advised the Lunch Ladies Book Club is coming to Project Entertainment Network. Join Shelley, Mimsy, and Ashley as they dish out a deep review of a book. Horror. Thrillers. Whatever they want to read and review. A blonde, a brunette, and a redhead walk into a bookstore and they're serving up hot book reviews. The Lunch Ladies Book Club? Coming soon, exclusively on Project Entertainment Network. Would you now stand for the national anthem?
Don't get your lunch money stolen!